Hey guys, it's Kira and welcome to my murder mystery weekend. We're officially on October now and I really feel like I need to start ramping up my seasonal reading because before we know it, it'll be time to crack out the cozy Christmas reads and I do not want to let the time for spooky reading, murder mysteries and horror books slip away without having read enough of them. So this weekend I'm dedicating all of my reading to the wonderful world of murder mysteries and I'm very, very excited about it. Now I don't know exactly how many I'm going to be able to read this weekend, but I'm kicking off my TBR with two books. One is a fairly new murder mystery, came out last year I believe, and then the other one is a classic. So starting off with the classic, we have Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, which I absolutely love this cover. I think it's so beautiful. But obviously Agatha Christie is queen of murder mysteries, and I only started reading her works for the very first time last year, but I really enjoyed her writing style, and Death on the Nile has been sitting on my shelves and now just feels like the perfect time to crack it open and see what it's all about. I feel like this is probably one of her most popular and most well-known novels alongside Murder on the Orient Express, which I have already read and I loved that one. So I'm hoping that that book's notoriety and all of the adaptations that follow it and the fact that I enjoyed that so much will mean that hopefully I feel a similar level of affinity with this one, because I would say they're on fairly equal playing fields in terms of how well known they are. But for anyone who has been sleeping under a rock and doesn't know anything about this book, Death on the Nile, the blurb says, "A cruise down the Nile on a river steamer sounds like the perfect way to get away from it all. But the tranquil darkness of an Egyptian evening can change fast when the air is thick with hot passions and cold malice. Temperatures rise when the first passenger is shot and Hercule Poirot must abandon the mysteries of ancient Egypt and focus on altogether deadlier matters." I feel like it just sounds like classic Christie, and I for one am very excited to give this one a try. And then the newer book that I have, not brand new but like I said I think published last year, is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. Now Alex Michaelides also wrote The Silent Patient, which is a book that I listened to on audio just before we moved into this house, and I was listening to it while doing all of my packing, and I thought that book was so interesting and I really enjoyed reading it through audio format because I felt like the multi-layers and perspectives were just brought to life so much more by having multiple different voice actors. But I never ended up getting this one when it was first published because I don't really know why, it just wasn't really on my radar at the time, but I saw it recently in Waterstones. It was on buy one get one half price, so I picked this one up and I do think it sounds very interesting, and given how much I enjoyed The Silent Patient and it was just everything that I could want from a modern psychological thriller, I have high hopes for this one. And it seems like it's going to be a similar style to The Silent Patient but a bit more dark academia in its vibe, which I think will also be really interesting because I love a dark academia book. So the blurb of this one says, "You are invited to join..." No, I just merged two words, enjoyed, which I meant to say you are invited to join, which I don't know how that came out, enjoyed, but you are invited to join the Maidens. The Maidens are Cambridge University's most exclusive society, whose members are selected by the charismatic professor of Greek tragedy, Edward Fosker, a secretive set of the brightest and most captivating students. When one of the Maidens is murdered, grieving young therapist Marina Andros is drawn back to the idyllic campus where she was once herself a student. Because beneath the university's ancient traditions and beauty is a web of secrets, jealousy and lies, and when the killer threatens the person she loves the most, Mariana will give anything to stop them, even her own life. Sounds so good. Very much has vibes of The Secret History, obviously with an exclusive group of students who are selected by one very elusive professor. Very much has those vibes, but then also the fact that we have a therapist who is invested in the story on a deeper level is very similar to The Silent Patient, and I'm interested, knowing how The Silent Patient ends, to see how this therapist is intertwined with this story, because there's always more to it than you first imagine. So those are the books that I have to kickstart the weekend, and I'm hoping to get through both of these and potentially some more, but yeah, these are my top priorities and I think they are going to set the tone for a murder mystery filled weekend. And if I get a chance, I may also try and find a murder mystery to start watching on TV, because why not just bring it all together with some good television as well. So that is what I'm going to be reading this weekend, but I am actually literally, as per usual, about to go out to get my hair done, which is also going to add to the autumn vibes because I'm actually getting it coloured, which I'm genuinely terrified about because I've never ever dyed my hair. My hair is completely just natural, and I decided, inspired by Dolly Parton's song Jolene, where it says fiery locks of auburn hair to book in to get some like auburny coppery highlights. So I'm hoping, because it's only highlights, it's probably going to look, fingers crossed, fairly natural, but because I've never done it before, I'm genuinely terrified. But sometimes you just gotta bite the bullet, and at the end of the day, it is only hair. So I'm going out to do that now, and I think I'll bring the Maidens with me because I don't know how it's gonna work, having never had my hair coloured before, but I assume there'll be some periods of me just sitting down and not actually doing anything. So I'll bring this book in case I have any spare time to get some reading done while sitting at the hairdressers, and this book just seems like the perfect one to get started on while getting my hair done. Although I do have a little bit of time now, so I also fancy doing a bit of baking today. So I'm actually going to start off with making some cinnamon rolls, go to the hairdressers, and then kickstart Murder Mystery Weekend. So welcome to the weekend. I hope you're having a great day.
Tell me if you knew. Would you hold it above my head and say it's all for the best? No, my life I've wondered what I should say. It always feels like a mistake. Another hysterical craze. I'm getting less brave by the day. Of cliches, what would it give life to my name?
So I feel like in this lighting my hair is looking exactly the same, but essentially we went for some like auburny and coppery highlights gone all the way through and round the framing of my face, and I wanted it to look fairly natural, so it's kind of the sort of thing where it catches the light and then you see these more autumnal colours, but then it doesn't look like I've had too much of a dramatic change, which is what I was hoping for because I was quite nervous getting my hair dyed for the first time. So very happy with the results, and I will try and find a more sun-soaked spot in the house to show you all the different tones that have come through, but I'm very, very pleased with it and feel relieved because I've been excited but also very nervous about this whole experience for the last 8 weeks since I booked it, so I'm excited that it's like finally done and it was a success rather than a drastic failure, so that's a win for me. And I also managed to get a little bit of reading of the Maidens done while I was letting the foils sit under the heat lamp, because apparently that's what you do now. But I managed to read 61 pages of this book, so I'm really, really liking it. And what I like most about this book, it's quite superficial, but it's very short chapters, which means that I feel like it is flying by very, very quickly. So far we haven't really dived into the actual like murder mystery that the book is about. We have this background story of our main character, who is the therapist Mariana, and her partner or husband, I can't remember which, passed away recently, so she's like a grieving person, but she's also like tied into this story with Cambridge, which I think we're just about to dive into. So we've got this like, I guess, tragic backstory that is maybe like clouding the vision and opinions and I guess like judgment of this main character, and then of course the drama is about to start. We haven't even got there yet, but what I've read so far is very interesting. And I also tabbed one of the pages, page 46, because it was talking about how her husband passed away, and they were on this beach holiday, and it says he was relaxing for the first time in months. He had a schoolboy habit of reading old thrillers on the beach, and he lay in the surf happily engrossed in the ABC murders by Agatha Christie. So I thought that was a fun little reference given the theme of this weekend and the fact that I too will be diving into an Agatha Christie novel, although albeit not on a sunny beach in Greece, but we'll take what we can get. So with that said, I'm about to go make some lunch, do some more reading, and find a spot where I can show you the light and the colours in my hair. We've had a little costume change because I'm actually just about to go out for a meal this evening. Last week it was my sister's birthday, so we're doing a family meal to celebrate that tonight. So I've put on a slightly fancier outfit, and I'm also very excited to show off my new hair. I think my mum will be pleased that I've actually got it kind of styled for once, because she's not the biggest fan of my natural curly hair, but I'm excited to see whether anyone actually notices the bits of colour in there. I feel like my mum and my sister probably will, whereas my brother potentially maybe not, because I feel like boys are just bit less observant about these things. But either way, hair aside, I'm still excited to go out for the meal, but the hair just adds an extra level of like, it's just worked out very nicely that I happened to be getting my hair done on the day that I'm going out for a meal, because I feel like so often you get your hair done and then you come home and you've not really got anywhere to show it off, so it's nice to have an opportunity to go out with some new hair for once and see if anyone notices. But aside from that, when I came home from getting my hair done, I decided that having baked cinnamon rolls earlier, I wasn't done with the baking bug, and I had 3 extremely ripe bananas that were absolutely crying to be turned into something. So I decided to make the classic ripe banana recipe, banana bread. And I also decided to do that one because Jay is currently sugar free. He's decided to do like a sober October, but for sugar, because he has a huge sweet tooth. So he's not having any refined sugar, so I didn't use anything other than the bananas in this recipe, so hopefully he will be able to have some as well. Although I am slightly annoyed about this banana bread because I put some like nuts on top hoping that it would make a nice decoration, but for some reason the nuts like flared up really quickly and ended up burning, even though the rest of the banana bread was just like a nice golden brown colour. So it's kind of ruined the aesthetic of the cake, I'm not gonna lie, but aesthetic aside and slightly burnt pieces of nuts on top, I think it'll still taste very nice. And the main thing that made banana bread such a good option was because it's basically just a chuck everything in one bowl situation, and then it takes ages to bake, which gave me the perfect chance to do a little bit more reading of the Maidens. And I am now on page 120, which is about halfway into this book, and I'm really liking it. I just feel like this book is paced in such a way that it feels like you are constantly being like dripped new pieces of information, and this like picture of what's going on is just building and building and building. And I feel like the author is very clever in constantly throwing in like new red flags to the situation, so that like every couple of chapters there's a new thing that makes your brain go, oh, that could be something to do with this murder, to the point where you're getting so many new things and so many characters are gradually being phased into the story that then you start to forget things that happened earlier. And I feel like that's a very clever way to keep you on your toes as a reader and make it a thriller where you can start to unpick and make your guesses about what's happening, but equally not make it too obvious that you figure it out in like chapter 3 and then the rest of the book is a bit boring. It feels very engaging because there's so much happening and so many different parts being brought into the story that it feels as though there's like so much to focus on and so much to unpick. So I feel like the pacing is really helping this book because it just, yeah, it feels very like intense but not overwhelming, and I feel like the balance is right in terms of like getting to know characters well but also throwing lots of new pieces of info in so you don't get too comfortable. And now that we're about halfway in, we're well and truly into the murder mystery element of the novel. And essentially, as the blurb said, there is a student at Cambridge University whose body has been found, and this launches a murder investigation. And then our main character, Mariana, who is obviously a psychologist, I think I mentioned, is kind of brought into this situation because, one, she was a student at this particular college at Cambridge University, and then also her niece, who she is the guardian for, is a current student, so she's kind of got this like past and present connection to this college, which kind of brings her into the situation. And in the first instance, she comes in as a like element of moral support to her niece, who was friends with the person who was found murdered. And then I think she starts to sort of doubt how well the police are looking into this situation and doesn't really trust their judgment, and so takes it upon herself to start doing a bit more of her own investigation and trying to solve what's gone on for herself, which is very interesting because it means that we kind of have like two simultaneous investigations happening, which I think is always like a lot of fun because you don't know which one to trust or what's really going on. And I think likely is that it will be like a combination of both that will result in the conclusion being found correctly. But what I do have to say is that I think it's a slightly tenuous thing that is happening here in the sense of like why the main character decides to go and do this investigation, because ultimately she didn't really know the person that was murdered and has like a minor connection to them through the fact that her niece was friends with them. But I don't realistically think that in and of itself would be enough to make someone like instantly doubt the police and start to do a criminal investigation of their own without any real prompting. But I feel like it's just a slightly more tenuous link than the one in The Silent Patient, which takes place in like a high security forensic hospital where there is like obviously a psychiatric ward of people who were found, I think, to be like not guilty by reason of insanity, and so instead of going to prison ended up going to a psychiatric hospital. And that story is told also by a psychologist, but in this instance a like forensic psychiatrist, I think, who is working in this hospital. So that felt like a lot more of an organic connection and reason for the narrator to kind of be involved in the story, whereas this one feels, like I said, a bit more of a stretch, but I'm finding it interesting enough that I don't really mind. It's just kind of jumped out at me as being, yeah, a bit more of a stretch of like logic than I expected having read The Silent Patient, but putting that to one side, I do think it's very interesting. I'm also noting that there's a lot of references to Alfred Tennyson in this book from like a literary perspective, which I think is interesting because he has a poem called Mariana, and obviously the main character is called Mariana. They haven't mentioned that particular poem, but I think that's probably just like a subtle nod to the Tennyson references, and in particular they're talking about Tennyson's writing on grief, which I think is obviously very well known for his like main piece of work, and he has this like particular stanza which I just thought was very nice. It says, "I sometimes hold it half a sin to put into words the grief I feel, for words like nature half reveal and half conceal the soul within." And I remember studying that particular Tennyson poem when I was doing my A-levels, so that was nice to see that pop up. I wasn't necessarily expecting it, and I think obviously that and then Agatha Christie means there's been like a few different literary references in here, which is always quite nice to see. So I'm about to head out for my sister's birthday meal now, which means I won't be doing any more reading for a while, but I think potentially when I get back this evening I might kickstart reading Death on the Nile, so that I'm kind of juggling both books, and then catch up with you later on with some new reading updates. So I ended up getting home a little bit too late last night to do any reading. I was exhausted, so just went straight to bed because I was actually covering a yoga class this morning, so I had to be up fairly early. But I have now come home, got myself ready and started reading Death on the Nile because I was excited to get started with this one and see what it was all about. I've read the first section because Agatha Christie's books are kind of split into sections and then sub-chapters. The first section is simply called Part 1, Characters in Order of Their Appearance. So it's kind of the scene setting situation. And in this instance, I'm not sure exactly what kind of year it's set in, but I'm going to assume like early 20th century is the vibe I'm getting. And it's kind of like a social situation where we have all of these characters who you assume are like fairly wealthy, at least to some extent, and they're all roughly planning their own trips to Egypt. And I don't necessarily think they're all coming together at this point, but obviously given the context of them being like in society together, I think the assumption is that once they're there, their paths will obviously cross. We have lots of different characters and groups sort of taking place in one sort of situation at the moment, and they haven't yet converged, but they're all kind of aware of each other. And the main character, at least from what I can gather, is like a young, very, very wealthy socialite called Lynette Ridgway, and she is like extremely rich and therefore is obviously like a key character in people's minds, and also someone that I think people pass a lot of judgment on because that tends to be the case with people who are well-known figures in society. And so based on that, I don't know who is going to die yet, but my guess is that it's going to be Lynette, because I feel like at least at this point she is the character who has the most like social power and therefore like potentially has the most enemies, or like the most reason for someone to want to try and get something out of her leading to her death. So I don't know if that's right or not, but that would be my guess at this moment in time. And I've now just finished part 1, and part 2 is called Egypt, which is obviously where the main part of the story is going to be taking place. So very excited to read some more of that, but I have to say more excited to get on with reading The Maidens because I desperately want to know what happens with this book. And based on how quickly I managed to get through a few chapters yesterday just with a few hours of reading, I'm going to try and finish this book now, or at least finish it today, before moving on with more of Death on the Nile. But I just kind of wanted to get both books on the go, so I'm now going to sit down, enjoy my tea and try and read the rest of The Maidens, because it was a very fast-paced book, as I said yesterday, so I don't think I'm going to struggle with getting through it because I think it's going to be very intense and I just can't wait to see what happens. So I'm just making some dinner, but I'm now just under 100 pages away from the end of The Maidens, and I have not a single clue where it's going to go. There are just so many potential suspects in these murders that I genuinely don't know what could happen. There is like a very obvious suspect who is like very much the prime focus of the main character, and I think that this person is far too obvious to actually be the killer, because otherwise it's kind of like right there in your face and it's not much of a mystery. So I feel like that is kind of our big kind of like decoy in the whole book. But then there is a nice guy who is maybe a potential, like I don't have huge expectations for it to be this person, but I'm thinking that that could be a potential for it to twist around. There is a not so nice guy who we don't know much about, so again a bit suspicion around this person, but again not like a huge amount to like definitely point in that direction. And then there's another kind of obvious creepy character who's kind of lurking in the background and isn't really intermingled with the rest of the story, but is more so just connected to the main character. So there's a lot going on. and I'm loving it because I have genuinely no clue what to expect. I also would say that I am loving the fact that a character who was in The Silent Patient has just been dropped into this narrative, and I don't imagine that they're going to be like hugely instrumental in the plot, but I do really quite enjoy when... oh no, potatoes on the loose. Potato disaster averted. Okay, so I do really enjoy when authors have like this, I guess, like dropping of characters in that like references that these characters are all in the same universe and they're not like individual stories, but they're kind of like all interwoven, and that like characters could cross over. And I think Stephen King does it quite a lot, and I like it because those characters that he references or places or like events that he references are never like hugely relevant to the story, but it's just like a fun little like Easter egg for people who do read all of the author's works, and then if you don't read all of their works, it doesn't really make any difference. So I enjoy that, and I was pleased to see that crop up. But like I said, I'm now making dinner. We'll be watching some Game of Thrones while we eat dinner, and then I'm planning to finish this one tonight because I am genuinely desperate to know what happens. A little Monday lunchtime hot chocolate because I'm feeling tired today, and I really felt like I needed an afternoon pick-me-up that was sweet and delicious, and hot chocolate just seemed like the perfect option. And my go-to hot chocolate, for anyone that is wondering, is the Options vegan instant hot chocolate, because it is so easy. It's obviously just like add to hot water and boom, you've got yourself a lovely hot chocolate. I always add in a splash of oat milk for some creaminess and also to cool it down a little bit, but it is as simple as that. And I feel like instant hot chocolates that you put in hot water can be so hit and miss because sometimes they're just like so flavourless and bland and disappointing, but this one I think is actually really, really nice and chocolatey. Now if I'm feeling fancy, I will use the Cadbury like stir into hot milk one, which is like just cocoa powder and sugar, but it is just like the epitome of luxury. It's just so creamy and rich and indulgent, and I used to always have that when I was younger, but that is one that I now will save for days when I want like a proper hot chocolate with cream and marshmallows and the full shebang. And then if I just want a quick pick-me-up that's sugary, then my go-to is the Options instant, for anyone who's wondering, which now that I'm thinking about it is probably no one at all, but here we are. But you could tell I'm low on sugar when my mind starts just rambling about things that are completely mundane like hot chocolate, but here we are. It is Monday lunchtime, and my plan is to drink this down and then take myself out for a little walk because I think it's actually quite a nice day outside today. It's very like sunny, quite autumnal, and I feel like we're in the last few weeks of there actually being leaves on the trees at the moment, so gonna make the most of that with a lunchtime walk after drinking my hot choc. But before I do, let's talk about the Maidens, because I finished this book last night and oh my god, this was such a good reading experience. I've ended up giving this one 4 stars because quite frankly it kept me so engaged all the way through. It also ended up having even more ties to The Silent Patient than I was expecting, but still maintained the fact that if you didn't know The Silent Patient or you hadn't read it before, that wouldn't impede your understanding of this book. But if you had read The Silent Patient already, then it just adds to your experience of the novel. So I feel like it's perfect for readers no matter whether they have or haven't read this author's works before. But I just absolutely loved it. I thought that it really took me by surprise how it ended. No spoilers, of course, but I didn't see it coming until maybe a couple of chapters before the big reveal, and then you start like wondering what's happening, you start to put things together. But it was like one that kept you sort of on the edge right till the end, and I for one loved it. My only critique, and the reason why I ended up giving it 4 stars instead of 5, is a critique that I have often with books, and that is that it just wasn't long enough. I feel like there just could have been so much more exploration, especially with the big reveal that I'm obviously not talking about. But as with any thriller, there is a plot twist, and with this particular one, I feel like we could have had so much more depth given to exploring what that is and what it meant for all of the characters, and it just like shifts your view of everything. So I feel like it would have been nice to see that sort of unpicked a little bit more. And then it ends with an epilogue, and I just think that could have been a tiny bit more detailed as well, just because I loved the book so much and I thought it was written in such a great, like, fast-paced way, but almost felt like as though that at the ending was to the detriment of my experience because it just felt a tiny bit rushed. But I do feel like I very rarely have a book that feels as though it's the perfect length. If it's a book that I haven't enjoyed so much, I'm like, oh, this is way too long. And when it's a book that I've loved, I wish it was longer every single time because I obviously just liked the reading experience. So there we have it. Really enjoyed this book, and all of the connections to The Silent Patient have made me really want to reread that book, especially because I listened to it as an audiobook the first time around, so I actually don't have a physical copy. But now, having read this one and enjoyed it so much, I'm kind of tempted to buy a physical copy of The Silent Patient and reread it, just because it's just piqued my interest and I loved this author's writing style so much that I kind of want to revisit it and experience that book but in physical format this time around. So that's going to be on the agenda some point soon. But now, of course, that means that we are on to Death on the Nile fully. I obviously started it yesterday morning, made my way back onto the Maidens, and now I've done a little bit more reading, bringing me up to page 63 of this book, which means that we are now in Egypt, although there has not been any death yet, but we do have the woman that I talked about, Lynette Ridgway, who is like this very wealthy woman, has propositioned Hercule Poirot for an investigation, not a murder, but she's asked him to investigate something, and he's like, nah, I'm on holiday, I'm not going to get involved. So we haven't had anything really dramatic happen yet, but I'm interested to see where it's going to go. Not sure how much reading I will be doing today though, because now, I think I mentioned, it is Monday, and that is the day that me and Jay watched the new episode of House of the Dragons, because it is on Sunday nights, but we watch it on Monday with dinner, and I'm so excited because I've seen lots of things about episode 8 being very dramatic, and honestly, I've been thinking about this show non-stop. I keep seeing like clips from it, as well as interviews from the actors, Emma Darcy and is it Olivia Cook, the two actors who play Rhaenyra and Alicent as the older versions of their characters. They're doing this interview where they're talking about loads of different questions, but Olivia asks Emma what their favourite drink was, or what their drink of choice would be, and that has gone viral on TikTok. It's everywhere. So I'm loving the whole assembly of the actors, the show, the storyline. It's incredible. So I cannot wait to watch that tonight. But for now, I'm going to go for my lunchtime walk. Well, I'm going to drink my hot chocolate, go for my lunchtime walk, and then I'll catch up with you later on.
I met an old man. I said, tell me your story. He took out an old pen and wrote something for me. Then he kept walking on down the road, and I watched him disappear like smoke. And I thought I'd just seen a ghost. Then I looked down at what he wrote. It said, son, when you grow up you'll be fine. I know you've got questions on your mind.
Just checked the weather app for the temperature because I am genuinely frozen today. I'm flabbergasted at the fact that Apple is telling me it's apparently 13 degrees outside today, because my hands and feet feel like ice blocks, and I genuinely feel like the weather app is lying to me because there's no way it can be that warm and I'm still feeling so cold. But it's lunchtime now. I've just made myself a absolutely delightful hot beverage. As you saw, I found myself picking up the Khalifa Farms pumpkin spice iced latte, and it is incredible. Obviously, unfortunately not to be a regular purchase because it's definitely an extravagance and quite expensive for how much you get, but I saw it, and given that it's seasonal, it won't be around for very long, I thought I might as well give it a try, and it is really lovely. It's an almond based vegan like iced latte, but it is unbelievably creamy, so I wouldn't necessarily expect that from almond because I tend to find that almond drinks can be a little bit more watery, whereas like oat and soy can be the creamier vibes, but this is really lovely, and it's got like a subtle bit of coffee in it, but it's not overpowering, and so it's almost like, I guess, a dirty chai, which is the chai latte mixed with espresso, but like a more mellowed out version. So I wasn't sure if it was going to be nice, but it is delightful, and I'm just like cradling my hands around this cup to warm them up. And I'm about to make myself some lunch and also a hot water bottle because, quite frankly, it's an absolute necessity at this point. But I decided to do a little bit of reading to kickstart my lunch break, and I am now just shy of 100 pages into Death on the Nile. And I'm really liking this book because I haven't actually got any idea what's going to happen yet. As I mentioned earlier, I had like a prediction on who I thought might be the person that gets murdered. And that person is still a contender, but the death hasn't occurred yet, and we now have a betrayal situation and a love triangle, which features the woman that I previously said I thought might get murdered, Lynette Ridgway, her husband, and also a friend of Lynette's, or rather an ex-friend. So we have this love triangle betrayal situation that has caused a lot of tension, and so I'm almost certain it's going to be one of those three characters that is the one that gets murdered, but I don't know which one of them. And I think it's also too obvious to assume that it's going to be like the person on the other end of the triangle who's going to murder them. I think there's probably going to be something far more like sort of mysterious beneath the surface, because that would be like a little bit too obvious, I think, for an Agatha Christie. But there were a couple of quotes that I quite enjoyed from the little section that I just read. The first one was Poirot talking to one of the people in this love triangle and trying to like talk them out of the spite that they're feeling, because it says, he says, "Do not open your heart to evil, because if you do, evil will come. Yes, very surely evil will come. It will enter in and make its home within you, and after a little while it will no longer be possible to drive it out." And I just thought that was like a really mysterious, dramatic way to tell someone not to hold a grudge, so I really enjoyed that. And then the other one, which I felt like was just very indicative of Poirot and his character from what I've seen of him in books so far, is but to succeed in life, every detail should be arranged well beforehand. And I feel like that just like is very indicative of the way that he approaches crime solving and detective work, and I'm really liking it. So as I mentioned, it's my lunch break now, but I'm gonna go make myself some food, and as much as I would love to be that good at multitasking, I find it really hard to eat and read at the same time because both activities require hands and they're just not really a compatible pairing. So I'm gonna put the book down, make some lunch, probably watch some YouTube videos while I'm eating, and then get back to work for the afternoon, and I'll catch up with you after work. And I don't know, me and Jay have been rewatching Game of Thrones recently, but I think we're slightly getting tired of it because we've been just watching that for the last few weeks, so I might try and find something different to watch this evening. And I did notice that on Disney Plus there was an adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express, so that might be a contender for tonight's watching. So it's now Friday afternoon, and today is actually Jay's little sister Heidi's 18th birthday, so we're over at his parents' house, which means I have the chance to sit in my favourite room possibly ever, because the lighting in this room is just incredible. Although slightly rude, I normally like to sit in this corner, but there is actually a spider in this crack here. I don't know if it's going to show up in the camera, but it's showing up in my vision, and I'm not sitting anywhere near that spider, so that's kind of rude of him to think that he could just invade my space. But that aside, I'm pleased to say that I just finished reading Death on the Nile. Because of Heidi's birthday, I actually booked a half day from work today, so we came over here and I read the book on the way over and finished off the last few chapters, and I really enjoyed it. I have to say, this is my favourite Agatha Christie that I've read. That would probably be And Then There Were None, closely followed by Murder on the Orient Express, which I thought was really, really fun, like proper classic murder mystery. Obviously that is a Poirot, as is this one, and I definitely feel like they've got a similar vibe, but I think I just liked the setting of Murder on the Orient Express a little bit more. But this was still an interesting book, and what I think is interesting about like Agatha Christie's style is that there's actually no murder that happens until like halfway through the book, so it's a lot of like preamble, build up, getting to know the characters before then they're all sort of thrown into the light of suspicion. I think that's a really interesting way to kind of go around it, as opposed to say the Maidens, where there is a murder that happens almost immediately and that kind of then throws like the entire book into that focus. And what I also think is interesting is that you are uncovering the mystery along with Poirot, so although realistically Agatha Christie is hiding things from you as a reader, it doesn't feel as much of a mystery or like a thriller, I guess, as ones like the Maidens, because in those books like nothing can be trusted until the big reveal because you're not party to like the actual investigation, whereas in this sense it feels like you've been brought along for the investigation with Poirot, and I feel like that adds like an element of like familiarity and makes these books like super cozy in terms of murder mysteries, whereas thrillers obviously tend to be a little bit more edgy, and I don't think Agatha Christie's books are particularly scary, just very interesting. So I enjoyed this one, and we also, as I told you a couple of days ago, ended up watching Murder on the Orient Express on Disney Plus, and right at the end of that one they kind of switch up the timeline a little bit and have Poirot get called straight to Egypt for the death on the Nile situation right at the end as he gets off of the Orient Express, and so we then realise that Death on the Nile is also on Disney Plus, so I think we're going to watch that one tomorrow night with dinner, and I'm very excited to see it brought to life because it is the Poirot version where Kenneth Branagh is Poirot, which is interesting because I've only ever seen him play Gilderoy Lockhart, which is obviously an arrogant character, but in like a way where he's arrogant without reason to be so, whereas I feel like he also brings an element of arrogance to Poirot as a character, but Poirot's arrogance is like well founded because he is obviously like extremely good at what he does. So excited to see Death on the Nile. I think that will be a great way to wrap up my murder mystery reading experience. But I had such a great time with both of the books that I picked this week. I feel like I really needed something fast-paced and intense to get me back into reading, because I have been slowly making my way through the Game of Thrones books over the last few weeks, and obviously I'm really enjoying that because I am fully obsessed with House of the Dragon at the moment. But because those books are so big and they are like fantasies, they're just like slow burn situations and you really have to commit yourself to them, whereas I wanted something that I can just get through really quickly and take off my TBR, and this book and The Maidens both really did that for me. So hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on these books, and let me know if you've read them as well, what you thought of them. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.